Here on this President's Day. Have you ever thought your medical coverage, well, had you covered? Well, only to get a surprise medical bill that destroys your finances for a year or more. Well, we'll tell you all about that and what the President's doing to stop it coming up on the Chris Salcedo Show here on NewsmaxTV.
The American patient should never be blindsided by medical bills. That is why I signed an executive order requiring price transparency. Many experts believe that transparency, which will go into full effect at the beginning of next year, will be even bigger than health care reform. It will save families massive amounts of money for substantially better care.
Well, welcome back, everybody. That was President Trump during his State of the Union address, talking in part about surprise medical billing. Our next guest says transparency will save families, as the president promised, a lot of money, and they'll get better care as well. Let's welcome on Tom Schatz. He's the president of Citizens Against Government Waste. Sir, welcome to the Chris Salcedo Show.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
How does this all work? Give us an example of a surprise medical billing scenario out there, that folks across the country are getting on a regular basis.
You go to a hospital, you are going to an in-network hospital within your insurance coverage, and yet when you go out, because of certain procedures that may have been done, one of the physicians or several physicians are not in the network. They have privileges at the hospital, but they were not in the network, so therefore you get billed at the higher rate, the out-of-network rate, that isn't covered under your policy. So, by the way, some people do have out-of-network coverage. Of course, that wouldn't apply to them. But in this case, half the country has employer-provided insurance. There are various choices within there, and a lot of people take the only in-network coverage, and they can get surprised by these bills after they leave a hospital because it was not part of their plan. This is even more, happens more often in emergency rooms, of course, where you don't have a choice. You simply get picked up and taken to the nearest facility. There are, by the way, rules against higher prices being charged there, but it is something that is literally a surprise to people. Sometimes as much as 20% of bills end up this way, a few hundred to a few $1,000s. The patients shouldn't be responsible. That's what the president was talking about. The patients shouldn't be getting these bills, and they shouldn't have to pay them. It's very complicated to fix, though.
Well, what I was going to ask is, if you're saying that the problem is people, I got to be honest, with our health care coverage, I don't know every jot and tittle of my health care coverage. Is it because these policies are so complicated, or is it because people aren't reading their policies and they don't know what they have?
Well, first of all, people should read them, and essentially every insurance company has the ability for you to go online, find out what the prices are that you need to pay for each procedure. In the case of elective surgery, elective procedures, you can find out up front. You can certainly call your physician and find out if they are in-network or out-of-network. Obviously less expensive to go to an in-network doctor, and some people choose out-of-network, but that's a voluntary choice. This is something that occurs when you don't know that it's going to happen in a hospital or another facility, and you don't check up front.
Right. Emergencies. Okay, and I think I understand where you're coming from. Now, the president's executive order, it is temporary, and I know that you're a big fan of Congress actually acting. I wouldn't hold your breath, but what does Congress need to do?
Well, Congress has several proposals, most of which we don't like. We're part of the coalition against rate setting with 13 other conservative organizations, and there's a letter that has been written to Speaker Pelosi by 39 members of the House, conservative Republicans, basically the entire doctors caucus, about 14 or 15 of them on the Republican side, saying do not use what's called rate setting, price fixing, price controls, where the government comes in and says how much the out-of-network charge should be. There are alternatives, one of which is the truth in advertising or price transparency up front, what I was talking about earlier, that you know in advance what is going to go on, and that the hospital and the insurance company and the physicians who are not in the network work out in advance what that charge should be, and you know ahead of time what that charge should be. A much more free market result than having the government say, this is what's going to be charged. It'll be likely unfair to the hospitals and the doctors because they're not going to get paid as much as they might otherwise get paid. And if you have the government step in the middle, you're interfering with private contracts. You can't make doctors join the network as a solution to the problem either.
Right. Well, let me ask you then if it's an emergency and you're sitting there and you need care right now, I mean, a lot of people in those situations aren't going to be in the position to say, how should we say, negotiate? So how is that going to work in a practical emergency situation?
Right. There are federal rules already where they can charge, I think it's the Medicare rate or the out-of-network rate or the in-network rate. It's a little complicated. Congress should fix that. And they should make sure that those charges are not unreasonable or excessive, but then everybody gets the facilities charges covered and the doctor's charges covered. Because otherwise, if you don't have the ability to cover the charges, it's going to have a dramatic impact on the ability of the hospital to provide coverage. This is very, very difficult in a lot of rural areas. Interestingly, there was a bipartisan objection to a rate-setting bill that passed the Education and Labor Committee last week. Democrats in rural districts and Republicans in rural districts didn't like that bill because it, again, has the government coming in and setting the rate, and it's going to be so low that a lot of these hospitals aren't going to be able to cover their expenses, and they might close. That's a big problem.
Yeah, exactly. The government doesn't know anything about health care. They've already shown that. Thank you very much. Tom Schatz, everybody. Hope you can keep us in touch with what's going on here. All right, folks, we've already talked a lot about